This is the story of Angela, whose path crossed with Stephen, a man with a mysterious aura. What began as a promising adventure full of love and passion unfolded into a tale with dark events and deep secrets. Stephen turned out to be lying to his wife, leading to an emotional journey filled with voodoo, death, and hatred. Why did Angela miss all the bad signs? Was she blinded by love? Or did someone use dark magic to make sure that her eyes were closed? This is Angela's life story. My name is Angela, and in the summer of 2019, I met a handsome man. I had just come out of a difficult relationship that lasted more than 5 years with a narcissistic man who had to remind me every day of how great he was and what he had done for me. After a long, unhappy period, I managed to end the relationship and told myself that I would remain single for the rest of my life. Little did I know that I would meet Stephen in 2019. Now, mentioning his name brings tears to my eyes, because how could I be so wrong about love? Welcome to my story. It started as a good friendship. Stephen was good looking, had a smooth talk, and had been living on his own for a year. Stephen was the kind of person everyone liked to be around. His family adored him, and gradually, he became my favorite person too. We shared everything and often went out to eat as friends, doing fun things together, like going to the movies. Daily contact became more intense until after a night out, we ended up in bed together. The night was so good that I want to ask you not to forget to hit the like button. Stephen knew how to play every part of my body. He was gentle and tender, but firm and dominant when needed. I came home with such a good feeling that I immediately told my best friend that Stephen was the dream man for me, and I was willing to enter a relationship again. Because we communicated so well, I knew that Stephen was single and wanted to remain so. After a good conversation, we decided not to label it, but agreed to take a step further than just friends. Yes, keep your judgments to yourself. I know it's not wise, but Stephen was so good, people. I had to agree to these terms. Stephen and I were having a great time when suddenly I received a Facebook message from a woman named Meredith. I didn't know Meredith personally, but I knew who she was. We had attended the same school in the past, and Meredith was a popular girl in high school. She asked if we could talk via Facebook, and I agreed. We had been on the phone for less than a second when Meredith, in an angry tone, said, "Do you know Stephen?" I was startled by the question, but saw no harm, and confirmed that I did know him. She made a tisk sound and said very angrily that she knew enough, and then abruptly ended the call. I found it strange and immediately called Stephen to ask about his relationship with Meredith. Stephen laughed and said that he had something with her in the past and that she had been trying to get him back for months. He showed me conversations where he made it clear that he had no interest in contact with her. I let it go, but somewhere I felt that the story didn't quite add up. I didn't hear from Meredith again, and Stephen and I happily continued our relationship, which I'll call friends with good benefits. In my previous relationship, I had pulled away from my ex during a struggle, causing me to fall down the stairs. This resulted in damaged ovaries, and I was declared infertile by the gynecologist, which meant I didn't have my monthly periods. In December of 2020, I started feeling unwell and nauseous more often. Smelling certain foods made me vomit, so I decided to get a checkup at the hospital. The doctor asked me to pee first so that basic things could be tested immediately, and I had to wait for the results of my blood test. The doctor came back into the treatment room with a smile on his face after a short minute. "Hey, sweetheart, I hope this is good news, but you're pregnant, which is why you've been experiencing these pains." I was shocked. Huh, pregnant? How is that possible? At the same time, I was overjoyed because I would miraculously become a mother. Stephen had no children, and by now, he was almost 40. I decided to inform Stephen after a week because I wanted time to think it over. I was shocked by Stephen's reaction because he was super happy and excited. Both of us had no idea that this would be the beginning of a great drama. Shortly after I told Stephen, I began to feel strange with every contact with him. At one point, he even asked me if I didn't want to be with him anymore. Every time he asked me to come over, I felt extremely tired, and sometimes I stood in front of his door but turned back home. He told me that he had happily informed his family and surroundings that I was pregnant and that he wanted us to live together. I decided to go along with it because despite my feelings, I loved Stephen and we were a great couple together. So I slept next to Stephen one night when I had a strange dream. In my dream, I saw my great-grandmother, who had already passed away, sitting in front of the door. I walked towards her and saw that she was sewing up the belly of a black cat. I laughed and said with a smile, "Grandma, well done helping this cat. You are truly a good person." She turned to me, looked at me angrily, and said, "This cat was sent for you. Be glad that I am protecting you." I was shocked by what she said and woke up breathless. Stephen had already gone to work, and I sent him a sweet message, wishing him a good morning and a good working day. Stephen immediately said that he wanted to message me earlier, but waited until I woke up. I asked him what was going on, and Stephen said that he was shocked today when he arrived at his car. His car was in our driveway, and next to his car was a dead black cat. I then asked him if the cat happened to have a white spot, and he said that the cat, indeed, had a white spot. He asked me how I knew that, but I didn't want to tell him about my dream yet. I said that I had seen the cat walking through the street the day before, which is why I asked. Not much later, my mother called me to ask how I was doing. I said it was fine, and she then told me that she had a disturbing dream about me. She had dreamed that I was holding a baby in my hands who didn't want to drink or eat. I was screaming and crying. All of this was too much coincidence in one day, so I contacted a family member of mine who was involved in voodoo. I told her about my dream and my mother's dream, to which she responded that I should come to her immediately. These were not good omens, and with rituals, she would ensure that I was extra protected during my pregnancy. My mother knew a man who performed cultural rituals, and once we arrived at his place, he said that I needed to be bathed with leaves and various attributes. I did this, but unfortunately, it didn't get better afterward. We had already had several ultrasounds where everything seemed fine with the baby. Now I had to do another ultrasound, and suddenly, it turned out that the baby was not growing well and would be handicapped. The head had not grown further, so it no longer matched the body. We were asked whether we wanted to continue with the pregnancy at this point, or if we wanted to terminate it. My heart was broken. I lost a whopping 6 kilograms in just 1.5 weeks, and Stephen and I grew further apart, having more frequent arguments. I didn't understand our fights. When he simply asked me how my day was, our conversation ended in an argument. His stalker, Meredith, became active again on social media. She started sending me daily messages with stories that I had taken her man, and that Stephen still occasionally came to her for pleasure. I was shocked by this, but didn't believe it, because Stephen was with me every night. On the internet, she began to defame me, writing the weirdest things about me. It even went so far that she began messaging friends of mine about the fact that I had taken her man and that I was pregnant with her man. Eventually, I was nearing the end of my pregnancy because we had decided to keep the baby. So, one evening, I went to bed, and it didn't take long before I fell asleep and had my dream. In my dream, I was in my home country, standing with a group of friends, relaxing in the sun. Suddenly, a large black car drove up, and a dark man stepped out. He got out and immediately pulled out a weapon and shot in my direction. The bullet didn't hit me and went past me, but behind me, I heard someone fall. I turned around and saw Meredith on the ground, hit by the bullet. I was shocked and wanted to help her, crying. I shouted that someone should call an ambulance because she was still breathing. While I held my hand on her wound, a woman in cultural clothing sat down next to me and removed my hand from her wound. She then said, "Girl, if you don't give us the right attention, we won't be able to protect you forever. Focus on yourself and let her go." I was shocked by what this lady said, and as I wanted to look at Meredith again, I woke up. I woke up because I had pain in my stomach, and the cramps became more and more intense. "People," I called Stephen so loudly, and I said that I probably had to give birth. Stephen grabbed all our things, and we rushed to the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, the doctor conducted a check, and all panic bells were ringing. The baby wasn't getting oxygen and had to be delivered urgently. I had an emergency operation, and for the first few seconds, the baby made no sound. The baby was silent, and people and my heart broke into pieces. Suddenly, I heard a baby crying, and I couldn't believe my ears. The baby was immediately taken to another room, and the doctor said they would give him extra oxygen and keep him under observation. I was both happy and unhappy at the same time, because it was not clear whether the baby would survive. I lay there in pain and had lost a lot of blood during the operation. The doctor said I still had to stay, and Stephen decided to go home. Our family members had come to our house so that he wouldn't be alone. Because I had lost so much blood, I was weak. And shortly after Stephen left, I fell asleep, and you can guess it. I had an incredibly bad dream. In my dream, I stood in the hospital corridor, and I felt that my newborn child was at the end of this corridor. I wanted to walk there when, to my surprise, I saw Meredith standing at the end of the corridor. I screamed and asked what she was doing there, and that I would harm her if I came there, when suddenly a large, dark man appeared and stood next to her. I tried to see his face, but the large, dark man hid his face and then put on a black hat so that I couldn't see him. I ran towards them, but the corridor became longer and longer until suddenly I was outside the hospital. In my dream, I looked at the window of the room where my baby was, when suddenly I saw a large white snake crawling along the building. The snake was so big that I was afraid of what it would do. I ran towards it and started throwing stones and sticks at the snake. However, the snake didn't go inside, but stayed in front of the window like a kind of guardian. I woke up, and once awake, I saw that my bed was wet with sweat, and I had a nosebleed. People, my child, spent 7 days in the hospital, and every night I had the same dream. Every night I was in a fight with a large white snake that kept me away from my baby, and every night I saw Meredith standing there, smiling at me. In my last dream, something was different. Meredith had something shiny in her hand, but I couldn't see clearly what it was. She walked into the room with the shiny object and came back without it. I couldn't place the dream, but because we were told that both the baby and I could go home that day, I left it as it was. The farewell in the hospital was strange. There was a male nurse who grabbed my hand and looked at the baby with me. I didn't understand what was going on, and he then softly told me that I should pay close attention to the baby because dark things were happening. I asked him why he said that. After all, I was on a pink cloud because I could go home with my baby. He said he had experienced strange activities in his days with the baby. Sometimes his crib was ice cold, and at other times, it seemed like a black shadow was trying to crawl next to the baby. He said he grabbed a Bible every night and prayed extensively for the baby. He said that a baby does no harm and should not encounter evil. I was so shocked by the story that I decided to stay in touch with him once we had been at home for some time, and thanked him for his spiritual help. To this day, it is not clear what was wrong with my baby, and it is still a mystery why we had to stay in the hospital for so long, and how it suddenly got better after 7 days. We left the hospital, and in my wheelchair, Stephen took us to the car, which was conveniently parked in front of the door. When we arrived at the car, I saw something strange under the car and asked Stephen to look. Stephen looked under the car and started cursing. I asked what was going on, and Stephen said that there was a black cat under the car, but he had chased it away. I asked if the cat was completely black, but people, you won't believe it. The cat had white paws and white spots. I was so done with this that I started cursing myself and said that whoever was messing with us should stop now. We left in the car until suddenly we heard a loud bang at the front of the car. Stephen got out of the car and saw that he had hit a dog. I asked him, "Where is your head at? And did you even realize our baby was in the car? How could you hit a dog?" He explained that he hadn't seen the dog and was also shocked by the amount of blood on the car. He said it was almost impossible that the blood came solely from the dog, and we continued driving home. Once we arrived home, everything seemed perfect. The baby was healthy, eating well, and growing as a baby should. The first weeks were fine until I suddenly noticed something shiny near the baby. This was strange and unsettling because just before that, I had a dream that my baby's finger was covered in blood. I asked Stephen how it happened, and he claimed he had bought that ring for the baby and put it on for him. At that moment, I didn't know that Stephen had been lying to me all along, and that he had maintained contact and intimacy with Meredith throughout. It wasn't Stephen who bought this ring for the baby, but Meredith, and this would have significant consequences for our family. But before I tell you more about that, I'd like to ask you to press the like button. If you find this video interesting, leave a brief comment in the comments section. This helps push our channel through the algorithm. At that moment, I still didn't know anything, and assumed that Stephen and Meredith had no contact with each other. I believed that Stephen had bought the ring, and I left it on the baby's finger. I was happy that Stephen had bought a piece of jewelry for our child, and we continued our lives cheerfully. I noticed that the baby came to me less and less, and it seemed like the baby didn't want to be near me. Whenever I approached, he would cry as if I, or something around me, frightened him. I called my mother about this, and she suggested giving my child a ritual bath. I did this and spoke well to my baby during the bath, expressing that I would always protect him and take care of him forever. The spiritual bath seemed to help, because shortly afterward, he fell asleep in my arms. This hadn't happened for days, so I was overjoyed. Everything seemed to be going well, but a few days later, I had terrible dreams again. In one dream, I heard a sound in the baby's room, so I walked there. As I approached the baby's room, it seemed like I heard my son laughing, and I wondered why the baby was laughing. When I entered the room, a small, creepy man was playing with my son by the crib. He was entertaining him, and I stood frozen in the doorway, screaming in my dream. The little man ran through me and out the door. Once I woke up, I rushed to the baby's room and immediately moved his crib to our room. As I placed the crib in the room, Stephen's photo fell from the cabinet. I remember this vividly because it felt very strange. The cabinet was on the other side of my room, yet, of everything in the room, only his photo fell. Unfortunately, my dreams didn't stop, and I continued to dream of little men every night. One time, one tried to strangle me. Another time, one tried to have intercourse with me. And there was even a dream where a whole group stood around my bed laughing. I was so tired of it that I eventually told Stephen. Weeks passed, and Stephen came home later and seemed more distant. He claimed to be very busy at work and often had to stay late. As a woman, you feel it when your man is cheating, and I strongly felt that Stephen's story didn't add up. So I called my mother and asked if she could babysit for an evening, planning to follow Stephen. I went into my Inspector Gadget mode and went out the door when I saw something strange in the bushes in front of my door. It was a strange bundle of grass and sticks with a red string around it. As I approached, a brown cat jumped out of the bushes, grabbing the odd bundle of grass and sticks in its mouth. I was still astonished by what I had seen, but decided to drive to Meredith's house. Arriving at Meredith's house, my worst nightmare came true. I saw my partner Stephen's car parked in front of the door. This was the confirmation I had always sought, and I immediately turned back home. Stephen stayed away almost the entire evening and came home just before midnight, by which time I had already fallen asleep. I felt him kiss me on my forehead and lie down next to me, but it seemed like I couldn't move and was completely paralyzed. This was such an uncomfortable feeling, and I prayed to God that Stephen wouldn't touch me because he had done so before when he came home, had a drink, and wanted to have a good evening. I didn't mind, of course, but now I didn't want it, especially since I knew Stephen had been cheating on me with Meredith. It also became clear to me why Meredith had stopped bothering me. It was because he was back in bed with her. Luckily, that didn't happen, and Stephen peacefully lay down next to me, and we both fell asleep. However, I had a very disturbing dream. In my dream, Stephen lay next to me, and his body was cold. I was shocked and tried to wake him up, but when I stood up to shake him, a hand came over him and held him It was Meredith's hand, and I saw Meredith looking at me with a big grin on her face. She stared at me and continued to laugh without saying anything. In my dream, I tried to pull her arm off him, but her arm was so tight around him that I couldn't get it off. At one point, I woke up, but since the baby was still with my mother, I slept so long that Stephen had already left. On my phone, I saw a message from Stephen saying that I was sleeping so well that he chose not to wake me and had left for work again. He would be home early tonight because he hadn't seen me all day. Normally, I would be happy with such messages, but you know what I had seen the previous day, and I wanted to confront him about it when he got home. I decided to call my mother and ask if she could babysit for another night. She could hear from my voice that something was wrong and asked if everything was okay. I said everything was fine, but that I wanted to have a good talk with Stephen. She advised me to take it easy and said it was no problem to babysit for another night. There I was at home, full of tension, as Stephen would come home any moment when I finally saw his car parked in front of the door. I gathered all my courage and was determined to tell Stephen the truth. However, Stephen stormed into the house with a strange little bottle. It was a small bottle usually used for drinks, but this time it contained twigs, grass, and other things. The bottle was completely covered in dust and wrapped in a red handkerchief. Stephen held up this bottle and asked, "Can you tell me what this is?" I was shocked and said I didn't know what it was and why he was asking me this question. He explained that he had taken his car to a good friend who had his garage. His seat occasionally came loose, causing him to be in dangerous situations while driving. His friend had then taken apart and repaired his seat, finding this bottle hidden in it. Stephen was furious and stood before me like a bull. I repeated that I knew nothing about it, but he didn't seem to believe me. Stephen stormed out again and walked to a pond near our place. He angrily threw the bottle into the pond, and in the distance, I saw him returning, still cursing. Stephen grabbed his car keys and said he was going to his parents' house. He was very angry, and it seemed like Stephen was blaming me for this. People from Black horror stories don't forget to hit the like button, because the end of this story is near. Hours passed, and I tried to call Stephen, but he didn't answer. I sent various messages to his phone, but unfortunately, I got no response from Stephen. At some point, I decided to call his parents to ask if Stephen was there. His parents asked me in shock what was going on and told me that Stephen had not been there. I was furious and thought he had gone to Meredith again. This time, I wouldn't let it go and decided to put on my coat and stormed out the door. I would tell Stephen exactly what I thought when I saw his car in front of the door again. With my coat in my hand, I opened the door when suddenly 2 police officers were standing there, asking me in a somewhat calm manner if they could come in. I asked what was going on, and the female officer sat next to me and said they were not bringing good news. Stephen had a serious accident and died on the spot. I felt the world disappearing from under my feet. What did I just hear? My husband and I had just had a terrible argument, and now he was gone. I asked for more information, and the officer told me that Stephen had tried to make a turn at high speed, probably losing control of his steering. It was a single vehicle accident because Stephen had crashed into a lamppost at full speed and died instantly. People, the street where Stephen wanted to drive was Meredith Street, When I heard this, I was so angry and at the same time so sad. I still can't process all of this. The period that followed was very strange, and as I write about it again, I get shivers over my body. It seemed like his family blamed me because his good friend told Stephen's parents what he found in the car. I repeatedly stated that I had nothing to do with this and that they should investigate in their way who did it. If I knew Meredith was so devilish, I would have left him immediately, and he would probably still be alive, and my son would still have a father. His family was busy with the solution when suddenly I received a message from Stephen's cousin. He asked me if I agreed to have a voodoo doctor give me a reading. This would clarify what was going on, because apparently they had received the message that Stephen's death had to do with a woman trying to bind him to her. But because this didn't work, she chose to do this. I agreed to this because I hoped it would finally prove my innocence. That evening, I had a dream where I came to a big party. This party was Meredith's. It looked like a gigantic birthday party. To my surprise, next to Meredith, who was sitting in her birthday chair like a baby on her mother's lap, was a black cat with white paws. I was startled by this cat because it was the cat I had constantly seen in my dreams. The cat crawled affectionately onto Meredith's lap, and she began to pet him. People, was this a sign that the evil had returned to its owner? Let me know in the comments. The next day, I went to the medium, and he held my hands. He asked me to speak my name and my birth date, and I did. He began to tremble and said that there was a lady and started to describe her. The description was Meredith, and he asked me if I knew someone who matched the description. I nodded with tears in my eyes, because just thinking about this woman brought all the grief back. He told me that black magic had been used by her and spoke of a blood sacrifice. This was done to bind my deceased husband to her. But because it didn't work, she kept going a step further. Her plan was not to kill Stephen, but I was the target because Stephen was eventually the person who touched the bottle and threw it away, making him the unfortunate one. He also said that Meredith had made sure the images of my ultrasound didn't look good. She had done this in the hope that I would choose to abort the baby on my own. I burst into tears and said that my feelings about that woman had been wrong since the first day. I also mentioned that I had told this to Stephen several times. The medium said that this lady was not done with me yet, and her hatred towards me was strong. She was angry because I not only took her husband away, but also ruined her good name among people because I openly expressed my suspicions. He advised me to seek protection from my ancestors and to find a voodoo doctor who could help me with that. Months went by, and I began to pick up my life again. I often dreamed of a gentleman standing at the door in a beautiful light shirt and a bunch of flowers. However, I could never open the door because once at the door, I woke up. In the dream, it seemed like the gentleman wanted to tell me that he had found peace and would wait for me. Dear followers of Black horror stories, Meredith was not doing well at all. She was in the hospital for months, and her skin was rotting away. I understand that they never found the cause, but I do know she is still alive. I wish no harm to anyone, but when I heard that Meredith's mother had a severe accident, I secretly thought that God's mill does indeed grind slowly, but surely. Someday, I will see Stephen again, and I hope that we will find peace together. Stephen, I will love you forever. Your honeyflower, Angela.